Right.
And it's Fran and Kathy, isn't it?
That's right. I'm from Springfield. I'm the co-chair of Disability Labour, and Kathy is Kathy Bole, who is a councillor from Ipswich on the county council there, and one of our vice chairs.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
No problem.
So there will be 10 questions, and Kathy's going to take the first 5, and I will do the second 5. So
okay,
Kathy,
lovely.
over to you.
Okay. Did you want to give a 5 minutes of?
Yes. Oh, thank you, Kathy, for reminding me.
That's okay.
Okay.
Of your. Go ahead, Fran.
Right, done. Firstly, we wrote to your team expressing our condolences on your mother-in-law's death.
Thank you very much.
And, you know, obviously reiterate that this morning. And I realise this is a difficult time for you. And thank you for taking the time to come and do the interview.
No, thank you for that. It's been very tough for my wife in particular.
Yeah, I'm sure. Would you like to spend just 5 minutes telling us your pitch and why you want to be leader of the Labour Party?
Yeah, firstly, can I just say thank you very much for setting up this Zoom call and having this conversation with yourselves and Disability Labour, which is obviously an important campaigning force. And can I just give this assurance that whether elected leader or not, I'll continue this discussion with you into the future, because this is a really central and very important issue. I mean, just to give you a sense of my overall approach on disability, I think we need a reset. I think that at the moment, too much of the approach is really focused on survival and not how people with disabilities thrive. And when your immune system turns on itself. And she was very disabled for all of her life. And therefore, as a family, we live with disabilities day in, day out. So I'm acutely aware of what it means when we're talking about other can walk or speak tragically. So there's a very personal element for me here in terms of understanding disability. And my casework all of the time, we run a very busy surgery on a Friday, lots and lots of casework. And a lot of that involves the TWP and assessments, and therefore I've seen firsthand the problems that arise. So far as the DWP is concerned, I think we need a complete culture change. I think the approach at the moment is one of a body or department that is to catch people out when it's doing assessments and imposing sanctions, rather than actually supporting people into work. So I think the whole thing needs a complete culture change. I think we need to abolish universal credit, and the assessments and sanctions scheme has to go, partly because of the culture, partly because they're wrong so often. Massively high rate of wrong sanctions and assessment. We did a piece of work for the Fawcett Society on this that made that absolutely clear. I think we need a social security system with dignity at its heart and support at its heart. And again, just by way of background, when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, we worked on hate crime and how we encourage people to report hate crime, which is always a difficult thing to achieve, how we train the police to recognise hate crime, because what we picked up over and over again was that assaults and offensive speech was being recorded, but the disability element wasn't. And training the police to actually look out for signs of disability hate crime was very important. And of course, getting the courts to recognise it. In that work, we worked with a lot of disability groups to draw up our own guidelines as to how we approach those cases. In my more recent role as Brexit Secretary, or Shadow Brexit Secretary, we fought long and hard for the Charter of Fundamental Rights to be included in the transition from EU law into our law. That's really important because, as you know, most of the early human rights instruments didn't have express references to disabilities. It's only the more recent instruments that do, and the Charter does. So we wanted to retain the Charter. And the final thing I wanted to say, because I'd be really interested in your views on this, is I put out a party reform document last week in which we raised the question of accessibility at Labour Party meetings, and the question of whether there wasn't a better way, perhaps with remote access, to ensure that we can have more inclusive meetings. So that's all I wanted to say by way of opening. Over to you for your questions. And thank you.
Thanks, Keir. It's wonderful to hear you talk about disability hate crime, as well as the whole welfare scheme is messed up. So it's really heartening to hear that. And my thanks for taking up the Brexit debacle thing and that role, because that must have been difficult. But
that fundamental rights, leaving that charter out, it was the only bit of EU law that the government left out, and it's the one bit that actually protected people better than other instruments.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to need to work together, and I'll get on to that, I guess, later on. But our first question is, and this alludes to what you just said about Labour Party meetings, funnily enough. Many disabled people have been unable to participate in their CLP hustings because they couldn't attend in person. Will you guarantee to ensure that disabled members or others unable to attend because of caring or illness responsibilities will have postal or proxy votes at all future internal party elections?
Absolutely, and I would actually go further than that, because a postal or proxy is obviously a way of being involved, having a vote, etc. I really want to explore remote access so that people can actually be involved in the decision making and influence the outcome, because if all you get is a proxy or a postal ballot, then of course you get a vote, but you don't get the chance to hear the debate, influence it, etc. And if we can do a Zoom call like this, bringing people together, it cannot be beyond us to think of a way of making our meetings much more accessible. I'm really struck by the fact that our meetings are, not really as open as they should be. Yeah, they really are. They really are.
And just to let you know, our AGM is going ahead on the 8th of March, and it is going to be a virtual AGM. So we're testing. I don't see why not, Fran.
Sorry?
Is that the first time you've done that, Fran? I'm really interested.
Yes, it is for an AGM. We hold the majority of our exec meetings on Zoom.
Right. I think the Labour Party should do this.
Yeah. It means that apart from the confidential session, members can come, they can ask questions, and we're really open about how we do things. So, and it works very well. I mean, I happen to be the disability officer for my CLP, and I'm also a branch chair, and I've zoomed into 2 branch meetings, in fact chaired one of them over Zoom.
Yeah.
And I zoomed into one EC meeting when I wasn't able to be there because I was too ill to get out of bed. So,
Keir, what we can do is we're having a meeting with the rest of the executive. If you wanted to stop by to the AGM, I'm sure we could work out something that you would be able to at least come in and see at least part of the process and stuff. I don't know if that's a problem.
Because, as I say, last week I put out a specific proposal for Labour Party ward and constituency meetings, saying we should trial remote access. So being able to say that I've actually participated in your own meetings remotely, and therefore got a sense of how they work, be really powerful evidence as to how that could work. So can I ask the team to liaise with you about that, even if it's just to pop in for 2 or 3 minutes and say hello and just see how it works?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, that's really positive, because we've really found it helpful, because we're recording the obviously the leadership hustings for us has to be this way, because many of our members wouldn't be able to get to a hustings. And it was received very positively, and it's less expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, when in government will you stop the frequent and traumatizing face-to-face interviews for ESA and PIP?
Yes, they need to change completely. And not just the interviews, but the whole culture of the thing. As I said, we're in this space now where I just think the culture is not one of how do we support people. It's an assumption that people are not obeying the rules and that they have to be caught out. And that's just got to be turned on its head, and the sooner the better.
I have to just interject with that. I mean, I never experienced anxiety until I was subject to the DWP, and that was to stay in work. But the whole focus of the DWP is to be in work.
Yeah.
And most of our disabled members are not in work, but they do other things. And I think that the DWP has fundamentally tortured disabled people through the way they've done things. So it's good to hear that you're willing to
just add to that, because I won't give details of the case, but I've got at least one case in the constituency which ended tragically, and we have been following a complaint with the DWP about the way they did it. And even in the complaints procedure, they've circled the wagons and won't look honestly at the decisions they've made. So it's not just the decisions they make and the approach they take, it's that then when they're challenged, there's a sort of double culture problem, because then they won't be open about what's actually gone wrong. It's a real insight into the problem that we're facing.
Yeah, and I think too, the fact that there has been a lot of, because of the way the culture has gone, nobody has access to any legal representations, and it's going to become quite difficult because of the way our Prime Minister is taking things, that you can't challenge stuff, they just won't take it on. So
I completely agree. One of the major findings we had when we looked into this with the Fawcett Society in 2014 was that if you want to challenge an assessment or sanctions, there's no support at all. Therefore, effectively, you can't. I think we've got an agreement from the government.
yeah. Sorry about that.
But
Rex, be quiet.
But, so you get decisions and then they can't be challenged. And therefore, even cases where in the end, the assessment or the sanctions were overturned, it took so long down the road that all the damage had already been done.
Well, exactly. And I'm really sorry about his barking, but if I try to go and shut him out, then he's going to bark to come back in. So I'm on my own here.
I'm going to take that as a
Well, actually, Rex has been at Labour Party conference a couple times and seemed to be able to meet everybody, whereas I met nobody. So he's a popular character. Okay, so just one of the quick things I wanted to add to that whole thing about the legal problems that we have is it would be interesting to explore with you ways of creating a network of people that specialized in dealing with disability cases from a legal perspective, so that we could work on a formula to be able to support even through the next 5 years if it takes that long to get them out over there. But it would be really good to work with you on
you take that forward. Yeah, I'm individuals or firms, but why don't we work with Society of Labour Lawyers as a project on it? Just look at where the provision is or where it can be improved. That's a very good idea.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm really good about suddenly having these ideas in my head and then always acting on the you don't ask, you don't get
Yeah.
premise of.
Now, so far we've got the AGM and we've
Yep.
got this. So we've got 2 actions coming out of this already.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that is one of the benefits of having started doing this.
Yeah.
One of the other things we have is, another question we have is, will you hold to account ministers who have overseen the deaths of thousands of disabled people because of inhumane and degrading Tory welfare cuts and policies?
Absolutely. And this is sometimes as a result of DWP, actually quite often anxiety that builds up. And in some cases leads people to take their own lives, as you know, tragically. Other times it's the circumstances imposed by the regime as a whole. It's a cruel regime, and it's knowingly cruel by a government that is more intent on just cutting the budget than it is on providing people with a fulfilling life.
Yeah, thank you, Keir.
And I've seen some recent stats which have actually come out saying that it's now costing the government more to do what they're doing in terms of having to go through appeals because they get so much wrong, that it's actually costing them more money than if they just allowed the claim to go through unchallenged.
Yeah, I think I've forgotten that. I saw a figure the other day, I think 53 or even 60% of decisions are wrong. So more than half of decisions are just wrong.
Yeah.
The tragedy is that only a fraction are actually challenged because nobody can bring a challenge because they don't have the resources to do it. So wrong decisions are in the system everywhere.
Yeah.
The other thing is too that there's that little caveat in the whole thing that if you bring a mandatory reconsideration, ask for that, and then go to tribunal, they may give you something and they could withdraw the whole lot. And that's the thing that scares people to death.
Yeah.
Because although they may lose their car, which will completely isolate them, but then you also have the thing that they're worried that if they do get care, at a level that will at least cope with some of the stuff, that it just goes out the window.
The whole system needs a complete overhaul. And
I think it needs to have its name changed as well, because anything that smacks of what we have now being carried in, I think is toxic by acquaintance kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Okay. Are you aware of how much money disabled people need per month to have an equal standard of living to those who are not disabled?
Not the precise sum, what is it?
£583 per month just to be on an equal footing.
Right.
And then, and we'd ask you, what ideas would you have to fix such a huge divide?
Well, I'm in favour of us returning the ability of local authorities to actually administer these funds, whether in the same way they used to or in some new scheme, and obviously would like to talk to you about how that would work. But it seems to me we've got to have a way of doing it. I think local authorities are probably best placed. I don't know whether you think they're best placed or whether it should sit with somebody else to provide that funding and services.
Yeah.
Well, let Fran might have some ideas on this, because we've been talking about this kind of thing for a while.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've looked at, and I'll happily send you the document that we've been working on, is to look to see if we can find a way of reducing the number of assessments people have.
Yeah.
Because, not only do you get assessed for PIP, but you also get assessed for social care, and trying to build up a holistic assessment system. And that's something that, because of my background, I'm a medical legal expert by background, especially in care law. So that, because of my background, that's something I've actually put together, and I'll happily share that with you.
Okay, great. Can you send that through to us, please?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Yeah. And because that should reduce the assessment to like one generic assessment, and then it will feed into some other things which Kathy's going to ask. Okay. Or I'm going to ask some questions about in a bit. So,
Yep.
yeah, Kathy, over to you for the next.
Okay, this is my last question, although I could think of hundreds.
I was going to say, we've only, I realise we're going quite slowly because we're having a good conversation about each question, but
Yeah.
And that I think is important, because if it's just the scripted straight on, it doesn't give any flavor of what the candidate's personality is like as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's really good. Many disabled candidates, and this is one thing that I've been asked several times, is being being a local county councilor, is that many disabled candidates fail to get onto both long lists and short lists for council and parliamentary seats for no apparent reason other than disability, because a lot of the times the people that are going forward for MP positions and councillors sort of have an idea of what they're getting themselves into, and there's kind of this thought that they're disabled people, so they're not professional or don't have what it takes to be a councillor or an MP. And what the question is what can you do to ensure that disabled candidates will be included on every long and short list?
Well, I think this is really important, because what we want to have, both locally and nationally, is representatives who truly represent the communities that we all come from. And therefore, not having people with disabilities is actually not to represent the communities we come from. I think this needs us to look quite honestly about the Labour Party selection exercise. And certainly in recent months, I've been pretty fed up with the extent to which the National Executive Committee has imposed candidates and not even had an open process. So I think we need to look at how we draw up the list in the first place, but then also how we involve party members in the selection. And actually, even things like having, it goes back to this question of accessibility to meetings. If at meetings where we're selecting candidates, it's difficult, or even having discussions about candidates, it's difficult for people with disabilities to participate, then some of the arguments aren't going to be made. So let's look again at how we draw up the list in the first place. But let's have a much more participatory arrangement for actually choosing the candidates. And actually, I think, as to what we actually want our advocates and representatives to do.
I think one of the things that just struck me about this whole question is that we have all women short lists, but one of the interesting things is about disabilities across the board. People who are disabled can fall into so many other protected characteristics that very often, if you say you have a Black, or BAME, I apologize for blurting out Black, but BAME woman who's gay and disabled is going to be 3 times more challenged than any, another candidate who isn't disabled. So I think we have to look at the fact that we go out across all protected characteristics.
Yeah, can I then ask you, I mean, you've got 2 actions from me. One perhaps from me to you is, I put out a discussion paper last week on party reform, one of which was about how we get better representation of our candidates. Would you mind, when you get a moment, just looking at those and just thinking your views? Because it was deliberately put out as a discussion document rather than, here's all the answers. And this was one of the issues we were looking at. So it'd be really, really helpful just to get your views on how that could work better.
Sure, I think Fran and I especially could sit down and have a discussion and give you a formal response to it.
That would be really good,
And then maybe we can set up some meetings subsequent to the leadership thingy and look at that. That would be really good.
That'd be really good,
Okay, thanks, Keir. I'm going to pass you over to Fran. I'm going to go mute so that Rex won't interrupt.
I just can't participate anymore.
Yeah, thank you. Just as a sort of add-on to that, one of the things I've been looking at is whether we could almost have the disability competence scheme in terms of candidate selection. So any candidate that has got those skills, if they are disabled, automatically gets onto a list.
Yeah, well, I think this is, at the moment, what we're looking at is ways of making sure our representatives are more reflective of the communities. So I think that needs to be part of that discussion as to how we do that.
Yeah.
Because I think there are different ways of doing it. You could have particular lists or particular skills, or even by inverting the whole thing and asking our question, what is it that we want people who are representatives to actually do anyway?
Yeah.
So perhaps we could have that as a separate strand of a discussion.
Yeah, I think that that does need to be, and that leads into my second question, or leads my first question, but second question on this topic, which is that standing for office can be prohibitively expensive for many disabled people. Would you champion some form of bursary scheme which will cover all reasonable adjustments for disabled candidates?
Now, you're going to be really pleased with my answer on this, because one of the things I put out last week was the idea of bursaries, because so many people who want to stand as candidates can't afford it. And if we don't have bursaries, then we're not really providing a level playing field for people. We went last week, amongst the proposals we put out were some sort of support college that could help people with skills, but also bursaries, so that because it can be expensive to try and run a campaign to be a representative, whether that's local or national. Yeah. And so bursaries were one of the specific proposals I put out there, so I'm very supportive of that.
Just to tag on to that one, I'm sure I don't know if you're aware, but if you're on benefits as standard for the council, your benefits are technically classed as your council's allowance gets taxed as and classified as income rather than an allowance to do your job, so you then lose part of your benefit.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the job center will sanction people, because if somebody says that they can't go out and look for a job, and just because you're upright doesn't necessarily mean that you can do that, and then you find out that your allowance will then penalize you through universal credit. There's no permitted work highlighted. So that's where the problem lies. And I know at least 6 different people who asked me about becoming a counselor. And because their allowances for the borough, it was like £3,000. For our county council, it's 10 grand as allowances. And additionally, the allowance that a disabled person gets will be used on a lot more than just paying for somebody's transportation around their constituency. So in effect, disabled candidates, or if they use the allowances to go and get a scooter and stuff, but then get slammed by universal credit because they're working.
Oh, we need to look into this. Yeah, I wasn't aware of the extent of this, so we need to look at that.
Yeah.
No, thanks for raising it.
It's a big issue.
Yeah.
You've already talked about your efforts to try and ensure that European law supporting disabled people got retained by the UK with the disaster of Brexit. During the general election, one of our pledges was, would you agree that the United Nations Charter on people with disabilities should, especially Article 19, should come into UK law?
Yes, you may or may not know, I spent many years as a human rights lawyer championing international human rights instruments and arguing that they should become part of our domestic law. It's all very well signing up at the international level, but if you don't make it part of your national law, then it doesn't have the teeth it should have. So I'm a big fan of this and would support incorporating it into our law. And Article 19 is the big one, obviously, independent living and living in the community, pretty critical to all of that. So yes, I think quite a number of countries have signed it, but we haven't incorporated it, and we should do that, particularly if we're not going to have the charter, the fundamental charter.
Yeah.
As part of that, Disability Labour has been involved in working with ROFA, which is Reclaim Our Futures Alliance, putting together a document about a national independent living service, where again, it's a bit like the old Independent Living Fund, and I wondered what your view on that was and whether that was something you would support.
I supported it when it was around before. It should never have been cut, and it should be put back. It can probably be improved on, but we should definitely have it. And it should be in any manifesto that we draw up for the next general election.
Thank you. How would you engage with disabled members so that you can understand some of the injustices that we're experiencing at the moment and ensure our voices are heard? And would you accept that all Labour Party policies need to be impact assessed? Equality impact assessed?
Well, I'd engage as widely as possible, and I'm very interested, as we discussed earlier, in exploring this question of remote access. And if I can pop into your AGM, that seems to me a very good next step. As for impacting our policies, yes, of course we should be doing that as part of our overall equalities work, but we just need to be more rigorous about it, I think.
Can I just ask, on that, would you be able to help us try to come up with a campaign so that one of the things that, especially in my lovely Tory-led county council, is that they never do an equality impact assessment because it's not a legal, it's not a statutory obligation for them to go through an impact assessment. And so they're running things through that should have done that. And especially because we've got urban areas as well as rural areas. We've got a real divide with people getting access, especially with poor broadband, poor bus services and things like that. And I know that we're not the only area that is like that. So
have you got a campaign up and running at the moment, or do you want to devise one? Should do.
Yeah.
Well, we can talk about that further in due course.
Thank you.
Now, our main campaigns for this last year have been about we've done the Scrap Universal Credit campaign. We've been involved in doing the Keep the Guard on the Train campaign. And
our campaign against Purple Tuesday.
Yes. And the other thing we've also been campaigning on is the National Independent Living Service. So those have been our sort of big campaigns for last year. We haven't got our campaigns for next year or for this year sorted out yet. So that's good. We've been concentrating on sorting out elections and doing stuff for the generals. So we're sort of lagging behind a bit on that.
I would like to ask a question in here just quickly. Is we brought this up with other candidates about the possibility, this goes back to the grant schemes and stuff, of coming up with a leadership thing, mentoring people through, like the Bernie Grant. And Labor Women, I think, also do, and Joe Cox. The Joe Cox School, and doing that.
There's nothing to disable.
The Joe Cox thing has been really successful. We should have an equivalent.
Yeah, I think all the different strands, that would be
that's a very good
self-organized groups, an LGBT one, and also a disability one would be really good.
Yeah, I agree. I would support that, definitely.
Terrific, thank you.
Thanks.
Wow, we're winning.
Right. My last two questions are around all the stuff to do with the complaint system. For many disabled people, especially those with neurodiverse conditions, can be really adversely affected within the current somewhat dysfunctional party complaint system. This applies to those who both make complaints and have complaints made against them. Would you agree to work with Disability Labour to ensure that we can set up a scheme whereby disabled people are supported by advocates throughout the system?
Yes, I would. I'd actually go a bit further than that. I think the system needs to be looked at again. I don't think it's got enough of an independent element to it. And I've always been in favour of advisors specifically to the panels who've got expertise in certain areas. So I'd support what you want to do, but actually I think we need to go a bit further with our complaint system because, as you say, either those making complaints or those complaints of need to have confidence in it. And at the moment, I don't think they do.
I think one of the things that's serious about it is the fact of safeguarding, because I don't know whether different bits of the Labour Party structure have this idea of safeguarding forefront to their mind. And
Yeah.
I probably do it in a very black and white thing with corporate parenting. And I think that we need to be looking at that as well.
Well, I mean, let's see what happens in this leadership race. But if I'm lucky enough to be elected leader, I think we should sit down and have a much longer session going through these issues.
Absolutely.
So that we can tackle them one by one, because they're each important in their own right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. You might be interested to know that I've actually supported one particular individual through the Welsh complaint system.
Okay.
And the Welsh assistant, acting general secretary was good enough to agree some reasonable adjustments for this particular person and for them to have an advocate there. So we have sort of trialled it, and it really worked for, certainly for the person concerned.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. It took a little bit of persuasion to get them to do it, I have to say,
but now you can say it worked, so which is good.
Yeah. But I mean, I have a background in advocacy because of my work, so it's something that I was really keen to see. My final question, again, is just on the complaint system. You must be aware that there are a large number of outstanding complaints where people have not had feedback on what's happening. Do you accept that we do need to look at all those complaints and that people who make complaints actually get some feedback on them?
Yeah, I agree. The feedback is far too long. I don't think, I mean, this is across the complaints system and there's just not the transparency that needs to be. And one of the first things I think that anybody coming in to lead the party is going to have to do is to get to grips with the complaints procedure, because in a number of respects, it's just not working in a way that gives confidence either to the people who are making the complaints or to those complained of. And if that's the case, then it's not really serving its function properly.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad you feel that it does need an overhaul, because I think it's caused a lot of distress in a lot of directions when it need not have done.
Yeah.
And I think too, I think with the fact that us particularly, because we're not, our entrance into the party system has been delayed by the NEC for whatever their reasons are. I have no idea. But the fact is that because we sit outside the Labour Party, we have a lot of difficulties in keeping our members, because part of our membership is requiring people to be Labour Party members, to be part of Disability Labour. The difficulty is, as an affiliate to the Labour Party, we don't have any way of checking to make sure that people are actually members when they join. And they won't speak to us. So if we can have a conversation on that after the after
let's
all
just
of
agree
this.
that we'll do that. Definitely. We've got a number of actions coming out of this, but then the last
Yeah.
one is that once this part of the exercise is over, let's have a further conversation to go through these issues, whatever the outcome of the leadership election.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good.
Thank you, Keir. And I'm really grateful for your willingness to continue this conversation.
Let's definitely do that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have any questions you want to ask us before we close the interview?
No, other than that we must find a way to follow up on the actions that we've agreed. I think I've got some of my team here with me who've made a note of what we've agreed. So other than to say thanks very much for letting me participate, and I look forward to continuing the discussion. We'll try, I don't know what I'm doing on March the 8th, but if I can find a way of popping in remotely to your AGM, I'll try and do that. Equally, on the other actions, let's follow up on them and look forward to it.
Yes.
Yep. Also, Keir, if you can't make the AGM, we have monthly exec meetings.
Okay.
So if we're reelected and you're, you know, yes, it would be good to invite you to come and have a look at how we do with Zoom.
Definitely. I'd like to do that because, as I say, I'm interested in whether that idea could work more broadly. Thank you very much.
That's all right.
Thanks, Keir.
Thanks.
Thank you
Bye.
very much for your time today.
Thanks.
Okay, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.